Container gardening is a great way to add colour to a small space. So if you're renting or you live in a flat and have a balcony, this is a perfect way for you to do a little bit of gardening in your small space. So I'm just going to show you what I would do in a big container to maximise the colour and the interest from a small space. So I've filled this large container with multi-purpose compost and a little bit of potting grit just for drainage. And I'm just going to add a layer of narcissi first, just to maximise the space so that you get a little bit of colour coming through in the spring. Don't worry about putting narcissi underneath other plants because they will just find their way up. So I'm going to pop those in first. I've got like a small dwarf narcissi called Jack Snipe, so I'm just going to pop these in here. And this is the right way up, so you want the pointy end facing upwards and the flat side facing down. So I'm just going to do a layer of these on the top. Okay, and then the depth for these is about 3 times the height of the bulb. So Jack Snipe is an RHS award-winning variety, and it's really, really nice. It's one of my favourites. It's short with white petals, and then the centre is like a butter yellow colour. So it's a really nice one to add to pots. You get about 15 of these in a pack, so I'm just going to use the whole pack in here. And don't worry about the spacing because you just want to get as many of these into the pot as possible. So I'll just show you how close together I've planted them. So what I'm going to do now is do another layer of multi-purpose compost, and then I'm going to add the rest of my plants to finish off the container. I'm just going to add another little bit of potting grit to this layer because it'll just help with drainage of the next plants that I'm going to put in. So I'll just add a little bit to there. So I'm just going to talk you through the next layer of plants. So the first thing that I'll show you is what I'm going to put as the centrepiece. So I'm just going to use this evergreen conifer, and that'll be the height in the centre, and then everything else will be a little bit lower, and that just adds a little bit of height to your display. So I'm just going to pop that out of its pot and then tease the roots a little bit. It just means that it'll put new roots on, so it'll take up water a little bit better. And what I'm going to do is just check that it is more or less in line with the rim of the container, because you don't want it to be too high, otherwise it won't be very stable, and you don't want it to be too low, otherwise the roots could rot off a little bit. So I think that's okay there. And then the rest of the plants that I've got to show you are a mixture of sort of perennial and evergreen plants, which means that you can just put this at your front door or on your balcony, and you can just leave it and it'll do its own thing for the rest of the year. And then when the bulbs come up, that'll just give you a little bit of a nice surprise in the spring. So this one is a sedum, and this is an evergreen variety, and it's also low growing, so this should spill over the side of the pot a little bit, which will make it a little bit more interesting. I'm just gonna see where I want that to sit. So I might have to make a little bit of a hole for this one, just so that it sits low enough in the pot. We've got a little Gaultheria. This is evergreen as well, so this will provide year-round interest. It gets berries and flowers in the autumn, and it'll stay like this through the winter as well. That one there. So the next plant I'm going to add is a heuchera. So it's sort of a semi-hardy perennial plant, which will add a little bit of different contrast because it's a little bit more purple. It'll keep it a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to pop this one towards the back here. So heucheras sort of mid to late summer will get little flowers on them, so little tiny little bell-shaped flowers on spikes. That'll keep the pot a little bit more interesting towards that time of year. So your pot should always look a little bit different throughout the year, but you shouldn't really have to do very much to look after it. The last thing I'm going to add is a little ivy. Again, just a little bit of interest and a little bit of trailing foliage, and this is evergreen as well, so this will last all through winter, all through spring, summer, and then back round again. So if you did want to change anything next year, you can leave this in and plant around it if you wanted to. Around here. and you can keep trimming this back if it gets too long. So this little bit here, I might trim that off because it doesn't look very nice. All I'm going to do now is fill this in with compost. At the moment it does look like there's quite large gaps, but as these are all perennial or evergreen, they will fill in these gaps. So you could, if you wanted to, add a little bit of bedding in these gaps for the next couple of months and then take them out as it starts to fill in, or you could just leave it like this. It's completely up to you. So I'm quite happy with how this looks now, so I'm just going to fill this in with multi-purpose compost. And then as you're filling in with your compost, you want to just feel around and make sure that there's no holes or gaps in the compost, because you want everything to have as much contact with the soil as possible so that it can absorb all the nutrients and water from the compost. So if you just sort of firm things down as you go in, you'll be able to see if there's any gaps, and you can just pop a little bit more compost in there. So I've just finished topping that up with multi-purpose compost, and the next thing I'm going to do is top this off with potting grit. I'm only going to use potting grit because I've got some left over, so if you do have any grit left over you can just use that, or if you wanted it to be a little bit more decorative you could use alpine grit, which is a bit bigger, or you could use white stones, which will make everything in here pop and look a lot brighter. Okay, so the reason that I've put a layer of potting grit on the top is not only just because it looks nice in my opinion, but also because when those first shoots of the narcissi that were planted underneath this come through, if we didn't have potting grit they'd more likely to be eaten by slugs and snails, so I do like to top the majority of my pots with grit or small stones just to prevent this from happening. But I'm happy with how this looks now, so I'm just going to pop this where I want it to sit. So obviously this could go out on your balcony, in a small courtyard, wherever you've got a space, and this will give you colour for the rest of the year, and all you need to do really is water it. So nice and easy.